Burrow is a furniture company known for timeless design and thoughtful construction, and free shipping, and that extends to their outdoor collection. Their outdoor furniture is built to withstand the elements, featuring rust-proof stainless steel hardware, weather-ready teak, and quick-dry foam cushions. For Memorial Day, get 15% off your Burrow purchase at burrow.com/ACAST and up to 25% off outdoor. That's up to 25% off outdoor furniture at burrow.com/ACAST.
Mom deserves the best, and there's no better place to shop for Mother's Day than Whole Foods Market. They're your destination for unbeatable savings, from premium gifts to show-stopping flowers and irresistible desserts. Start by saving 33% with Prime on all body care and candles. Then get a 15-stem bunch of tulips for just $9.99 each with Prime. Round out Mom's menu with festive rosé, irresistible berry chantilly cake, and more special treats. Come celebrate Mother's Day at Whole Foods Market.
Ready to pop the question? The jewelers at BlueNile.com have got sparkle down to a science with beautiful lab-grown diamonds worthy of your most brilliant moments. Their lab-grown diamonds are independently graded and guaranteed identical to natural diamonds, and they're ready to ship to your door. Go to BlueNile.com and use promo code LISTEN to get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more. That's code LISTEN at BlueNile.com for $50 off. BlueNile.com, code LISTEN.
Pilot to Bombardier. Your ship. Bombardier to pilot. Roger. Bombardier to crew. Bombay doors open. Pilot to radio operator. Camera on. Bombs away.
We are going to win the war, and we are going to win the peace that follows.
Welcome to the Mighty Eighth podcast, the podcast about the people, planes and the places of the United States 8th Army Air Force during World War II, with me, Johan Tasker, and military historian Mike Peters. In this episode, we're in Norfolk, about 4 miles from the market town of Diss in the east of England. We're here at Thorpe Abbotts, and we're here at the 100th Bomb Group Memorial Museum. Mike, the 100th Bomb Group is probably the most famous bomb group of them all. It's notorious for losing lots of men, lots of planes, some of the most disastrous losses in the history of the mighty 8th Air Force. Its history is a stuff of legend. It's nicknamed the Bloody Hundredth. Death is never far away when people talk about the 100th Bomb Group.
Yeah, the 100th is certainly the most written about, and you said famous, maybe it's infamous for those losses, particularly in 1943, where complete formations are being taken out, and in one instance, only one aircraft returns from a raid. And clearly, the new TV series Masters of the Air is going to raise interest even further. But there's more to it than that. The history is probably even more interesting. It's full of very strong personalities, colourful incidents that happened right the way through the bomb group's history. It is going to be interesting to see how much of the truth comes through, because the 100th has a very patchy reputation, certainly in its first year. And today we're really going to talk about 1943, which is where the nickname the Bloody Hundredth originates. There are all kinds of legends, myths, and certainly a whole culture of folklore surrounding the 100th Bomb Group. But were they unlucky? Or was it down to the way they flew, or lack of discipline, their poor training? Was there really a vendetta? Did the Luftwaffe really seek out aircraft with the square D on the tail were the 100th Bomb Group aircraft? All of these questions we're going to look at today. But I'm glad we're here, because it's about to become really high profile with the advent of the new Masters of the Air TV series. And that will inevitably bring more people to the subject. But what is myth? What is legend? And actually, what is truth? And what is the real history of the 100th?
Well, we're here in the car park of the 100th Bomb Group Memorial Museum here at Thorpe Abbotts. The museum volunteers, the trustees have been kind enough to welcome us here. It's a cold morning in January. They've opened their gates to us. They're going to open their archives. They're going to show us around and give us and you, the listener, a behind-the-scenes look at life in the 100th Bomb Group. Let's go and meet them. You're listening to the Mighty 8th podcast, the podcast about the people, the planes and the places of the United States 8th Army Air Force during World War II. The control tower here at Thorpe Abbotts is the star attraction. It's been lovingly restored, painted green. It looks almost as it would have done in 1943, and it houses some of the museum's most precious collections, and we're going to have a look at some of those later on in this episode of the podcast. But for now, we've climbed the metal steps to the top, which really does transport you back to World War II, and it gives us a great panoramic view of what would have been a vast military airbase. And we're joined by Reg Wilson, Chair of the Trustees of the 100th Bomb Group Memorial Museum. Reg, what can we see?
Well, standing here beside the glass house, if we look out towards the south, we can see pretty much an airfield that's been unchanged since 1943. OK, we've lost some of the concrete, the aircraft on there, we've lost the hard stands, but the shape of this airfield has remained pretty much unchanged since then. So if you look out to the south, we can see in front of the tower part of the peritrack, the taxiway, and beyond that we have about 100 yards or so of the original main runway. We have one of the cross runways, we have quite a bit of that. That scene has remained pretty much as it was in 1943, so if you were here at that time, you'd see the same sort of thing that we're looking at now, except there would probably have been about 50 flying fortresses standing on the hard stands around the perimeter of the airfield, all visible from this point, so you could control the aircraft movements. And again, to the sort of south over there, a line of trees marked the start of all the accommodation and technical areas associated with the airfield. So over there was the home for about 3,000 to 3,500 Americans. And the 100th flew its first proper mission from here on the 25th of June 1943.
So we know the 100th Bomb Group was here, Reg, but what does that comprise of?
There were 4 squadrons of aircraft here. The 351st, which was located along the line where we are now north of the airfield. The 349th, which is essentially across to the east of the airfield. Down to the southeast was the 350th Squadron, and then along to the southwest was the 418th Squadron. The 100th Bomb Group had the 4 squadrons, as most of the bomb groups did, but also the 100th was part of the 13th Combat Wing, which would be 3 bomber groups that tended to fly together on missions, and that comprised the 95th at Horham and the 390th at Framlingham, along with Thorpe Abbotts.
And Mike, those squadrons, they would have formed a combat wing within the 3rd Air Division.
Yeah, as Regis said, so the bomb group here flies with 2 other bomb groups as part of a combat wing. And in this case, it's the 13th Combat Wing, which is part of the 3rd Air Division, who have their headquarters at Elvedon in Suffolk. Also flying as part of the 3rd Air Division of the 4th Combat Wing, who have their headquarters at Bury St Edmunds, at what we now know as Rougham, and the 45th Combat Wing, who fly from Snetterton. So that is the 3rd Air Division, and that they work alongside the 1st Air Division and the 2nd Air Division. So the 3 Air Divisions, which are the 8th Air Force Bomber Command.
Reg, the first 8 missions of the 100th Bomb Group, they were particularly unfortunate. They're unlucky.
I think when you ask what was the cause of them becoming known as the Bloody Hundredth, I think it just comes down to, as you said, luck. And they had bad luck. I mean, their very first mission, they lost 3 aircraft, so 30 aircrew lost on the first mission. And then as we go through 1943 into August and then October, the losses are going to start to rack up. And so in August, they lose 9 aircraft attacking Regensburg. And then in October, is in Black Week, on the 8th of October, they lose 7 aircraft. The next day, they fly to Marienburg. They're lucky they don't lose anything. And then on the 10th is the Munster mission. And on Munster, we have 13 aircraft leaving this airfield, and only one comes back, flown by Rosie Rosenthal. So in those 3 days, this airfield has lost about 40% of the air crew, and about 40% of the aircraft. And that's a massive impact on the morale of the base. So by the middle of Black Week, the morale here has taken a big hit. And that's only going to generate or reinforce any impression that this is a bad luck organisation. If you come here, the chances are you're not going to leave. And where does the luck involve? The luck largely comes from where you end up in that formation. You know, the Germans don't go looking for a specific bomb group. What they're looking for is the easiest target. What can they hit and get away from? And those locations in the bomb stream at the back, low at the back or at the front, that's where the 100th ends up quite often. And that's why the 100th takes losses, because it's just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Mike, 1943 was a particularly challenging year for the 8th Air Force.
Yeah, it was, Johan. I mean, we're still trying to grow an Air Force. We've spoken in previous podcasts about mission number 1, Rouen, and from when we were at Grafton Underwood, and how it's a few aircraft, a handful, one single squadron almost, and then it's growing. And as quickly as the 8th Air Force is gaining new squadrons and groups, it's losing aircraft. And how do you maintain that? And they're trying to get further. And there's also the issue of all the things, the weather. They're learning how to fight and learning how to operate. And the 100th is a great case in point where you go through the training cycle in the United States in good weather. You practice, you train, etc. And then you get here, and it's different. The weather is different. Particularly is a massive factor. Navigation, actually bombing for real through cloud is more challenging. Flak, the Luftwaffe, it's completely different. They've done their best to prepare these guys for what's to come, but in 1943 it's all pretty new, and they're locked into this daylight precision bombing doctrine, and the losses are staggering.
So the Bloody Hundredth, it's the stuff of myth and the stuff of legend, one of them being the wheels down incident, the pickle puss situation. Tell me about that, Reg.
Yeah, that's one of the, if you like, myths behind how the 100th became known as the Bloody Hundredth. It was an incident in which an aircraft, which some people say was pickle puss, lowered its wheels as a sign of surrender, and was then closed in by German fighters who were going to escort it to one of their airfields. But it's said that this aircraft then opened fire on the German aircraft. Now, that incident has never been verified by anyone from the 100th, and even at the end of the war, Adolf Galland, who was in charge of the Luftwaffe, said he never knew anything of that incident.
Mike, what's your view on this? I mean, what would the consequences of something like this be? Well,
it's interesting, isn't it? Because as Reg says, this is really an unofficial thing that you'd do. You'd lower your wheels. It's almost like waving a white flag. For a bomber to lower its wheels and reduce speed and fall out of formation it's almost making itself helpless. So that would indicate you're about to surrender. And the wheels down incident is also attributed to the 390th, a pilot called James Regan as well. Again, pretty much unsubstantiated. So, and if you really think about it, if you were going to surrender, you would surrender. And for those waist gunners and maybe the upper turret to shoot down 2 FW90s, 190s in a go like that, it would be quite an achievement. And then how would you escape after that? So it really, I think it's a myth. And then if you really think about it, if you're the Luftwaffe fighter arm and you are so enraged by this, the practicalities of hunting out a single individual bomb group in a 100-mile bomber stream and wasting time looking for them when you could be shooting down other bombers, which is your primary function, doesn't really hold water. I think it's just part of the folklore of the Bloody Hundredth. And many people will say this is the datum point where the nickname originates. That's even more, as Reg said, it's even more difficult to prove. I think it's deeper than that. It's about the reputation of the bomb group in stateside before they get here, the discipline and behaviour, and then also the losses, particularly through 1943, which we're going to talk about later in the podcast with Reg.
It's a compelling story, though, isn't it? It's almost like one of those stories that you want to believe because it's just so amazing.
Yeah, you want to believe it, and maybe if you're at the time, and you're taking these losses, and your bomb group's not doing very well, it's a good story it's a good conspiracy theory as to why you're taking those losses. But when we start to talk about this a little bit more, we'll see there are lots of other circumstances and reasons why the 100th is being attrited so heavily.
Well, let's leave the top of the control tower and let's go down into the museum and let's look at one of those missions in depth, the Stuttgart mission of September 1943.
Mom deserves the best, and there's no better place to shop for Mother's Day than Whole Foods Market. They're your destination for unbeatable savings, from premium gifts to show-stopping flowers and irresistible desserts. Start by saving 33% with Prime on all body care and candles. Then get a 15-stem bunch of tulips for just $9.99 each with Prime. Round out Mom's menu with festive rosé, irresistible berry chantilly cake, and more special treats. Come celebrate Mother's Day at Whole Foods Market.
Mother's Day is around the corner. Find the perfect gift for the mom in your life with a stunning piece of jewelry from Blue Nile. From timeless pearls to dazzling gemstones, Blue Nile has something she'll adore. Need it fast? Most items can ship overnight. Plus, enjoy guaranteed free shipping and returns. Don't miss our special Mother's Day deals. Save big on the season's most beautiful trends. For a limited time, get up to 50% off by going to BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com.
You're listening to the Mighty Eighth Podcast, the podcast about the people, the planes, the places of the United States 8th Army Air Force during World War II. We've come into the control tower now, the ground floor of the control tower. We're going to talk about the Stuttgart mission. Mike, we've mentioned the Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission. We've done an episode of the podcast all about that mission on the 17th of August, 1943. 3 weeks later, the 100th Bomb Group went on another deep mission into Germany, disastrous as well, the Stuttgart mission.
Yeah, this is the first deep penetration raid after Schweinfurt-Regensburg, and it's an attack which involves 338 B-17s, which are going for industrial targets around Stuttgart. It's quite a way into Third Reich airspace. And the lead element is the 1st Air Division, and the 100th Bomb Group with the 3rd Air Division in the second echelon of this mission. Unfortunately, the mission becomes disorganised, the formations start to loosen and be broken up by confusion, navigational errors, flak, and German fighters who started to mass and were directed in by German fighter controllers. 27 bombers are lost from the lead formation. There's a huge number of aircraft and crews. The second wave, which involves the 100th Bomb Group, 18 aircraft from that formation failed to return. So after Schweinfurt-Regensburg, this is quite a large number of aircraft which have been damaged and lost again. So you can see why in the autumn of 43, people are starting to look around and think, is this going to work?
And they were right in a way to question that. I mean, flying in formation it's not an easy thing to do, is it? It requires lots of discipline, lots of practice. It's easy to say. It's easy for us to stand here and say, well, they should have kept formation. But it wasn't an easy thing to do.
No, even without flak or enemy fighters, it's quite difficult to fly such large aircraft in such a tight formation. And the slightest bit of turbulence can affect that, errors of judgment, and you've got to keep the revs on your engine just right, your propeller pitch just right to keep it constant. You've only got to think about riding alongside someone on a bicycle, 2 or 3 of you to try and keep in line. Imagine doing that at 20,000 feet in a 4-engine bomber, being bucked around, flying through intermittent cloud where you've got to keep a visual reference with each other. It's a really difficult thing to do. And this is one of the key things about the 100th Bomb Group, which we're talking about here, is you need to be disciplined, you need to be trained, you need to practice. And different group commanders place different emphases on different areas of the mission and how they conduct that. And if you don't get this bit right, it really does come home to roost, because you're trying to get to the target together, to pick out the target, and you want to be in a tight formation so that when you drop your bombs, they land together. So not only is it about fighter defence, it's also and protection, it's about actually being accurate on target.
And you say about protection, this was before the B-17G came along, which was the version of the B-17, the Flying Fortress, with the chin turret, with the forward-facing guns, which gave them added protection against head-on attacks by German fighter planes. Yeah,
and the Germans are learning as well. And it's a reverse situation of the Battle of Britain. They've got time to loiter, they've got time to pick out targets, and they very quickly work out that the head-on attack, the B-17 has an Achilles heel, it's the nose. Because the guns are actually in the nose, very few of them, before the chin turret, actually can be faced directly forward. They're off at a slight angle, and you look into the B-17 to your left and right and above and below to protect you. But if you're a determined German expert and fighter pilot, you come straight in and you're aiming for the nerve centre of a B-17. If you hit the nose, navigator, bombardier, 2 pilots, ideally the pilots, that's it. Doesn't matter about the rest of the guys in the back. You can take that aircraft out, and that's what they very quickly learned to do.
And that's exactly what they did on the Stuttgart mission. If we look at the display here, it focuses on Squawking Hawk 2, an aircraft which was hit from 12 o'clock high, as in the film, by 2 pairs of fighters with 20mm shells ripping through the aircraft's tail and fuselage, and also taking hits to the cockpit and the nose section. Yeah, and it's a classic Luftwaffe attack, and they've gone for the weak spot, as I've just described, and that's going to really affect the performance of the crew. So Squawking Hawk is hit. Mike, this is a fantastic exhibit. It's not just about the plane, it's about the crew too. Yeah, it's really good. And what this allows us to do is to look at the human factor and actually the composition of a B-17 crew. And the guys at Thorpe Abbotts have done a great job here. And the family have been involved in producing this as well. So you mentioned how it happens. They're attacked classically from 12 o'clock high by 2 pairs of fighters. So that's 4 fighters attacking 1 B-17. And you can imagine how terrifying that might have been. They're taking hits in the cockpit, the nose section. But then Harold Pope, who's the top turret gunner, takes out one of the FW-190s. But as he hits it, it explodes and the debris splatters all over the B-17, causing damage to one of the horizontal stabilisers, and it punctures a fuel tank. So that gives you a really vivid idea of just how close these Focke-Wulfs are to the B-17s. So when you think of that in the context of how close the formations are, you can see why these gaps start to appear. An exploding fighter in the middle of your combat box, at the closing speeds they're going at, is something else. And the tracer flying around from all the guns in amongst the combat box. You've got to be really careful not to hit your own mates. But this attack on the Squawking Hawk, because it hits the fuel tank and the stabiliser, is pretty catastrophic. And also it damages the oxygen system, which at that height is life-threatening. They need to get themselves sorted out and get onto oxygen tanks. As the smoke is clearing, Russell Engel, who's the navigator of the Squawking Hawk, in the nose of the aircraft, is blown out of his position, blown out of his seat and back into the aircraft. And there are pictures of the crew of Squawking Hawk here in this display. Yeah, and that really personalises the story. And we just mentioned the navigator being thrown out. He receives severe head trauma. He loses an eye. He's got shrapnel that rips in his hands, his arms, his legs. So he's in real trouble in the aircraft. You can imagine the bombardier being aware of that because he's right next to him. Pete DeLeo, he's trying to help the navigator, although he's seriously wounded himself. He's also receiving calls from the pilot, who's been hit by shrapnel. The Squawking Hawk is in no fit state to carry on with the mission. And the crew that are fit to do anything are trying desperately to treat the wounded, repair the aircraft systems and keep it in the air. The co-pilot, Harry Eadburn, has been struck in the right shoulder by a 20mm shell that passes through him and explodes on the armoured seat behind him, mortally wounded. So he got the backsplash of a 20mm shell hitting the armour and then hitting him twice. So he's been hit twice by the same shell. The resulting explosion of that shell seriously wounds the pilot, who's now struggling to fly the aircraft while all this is going on around him. And Harry drifts in and out of consciousness and on 3 occasions returning to his seat to assist in flying the plane, which is still being harassed by Luftwaffe fighters. So you can imagine waist gunner, tail gunner, still fighting their individual battles behind, while the guys up in the front of the aircraft are trying to keep the aircraft flying, treat the wounded and get themselves home. Eventually, Harry is laid between the pilot and the co-pilot in the lower compartment. He's unconscious through loss of blood, and sadly, he passes away. The pilot, Captain Summerreader, dives the aircraft down below 10,000 feet and into heavy cloud. But there are gaps, and they're playing cat and mouse because the Luftwaffe have not gone away. As we know, they go for wounded aircraft, stricken aircraft, and this is a very weakened aircraft. They know if they can find it, they can probably finish it off. Squawking Hawk eventually leaves the safety of the clouds. The navigator Engel manages to get into the cockpit and assist with flying the battered plane for over an hour. They're low on fuel. They've managed to work out where they are and use radio signals to plot a course for home. And then they eventually catch sight of the south coast of England and Kent. Sumner, Spotsy, rough grass strip. So they'd managed to land at RAF Staplehurst, which was a Canadian Air Force base. That's just one
episode in a raid. When you think about how many of those crews were shot down, and that's been repeated all around the bomber stream. But it does give an illustration of what happens to a B-17 when it's isolated from the protection of the main formation.
So we've got pictures of all the crew of Squawking Hawk here in this display. So, Reg, we've talked about armament, we've talked about the combat box, the formation flying. It's not just about discipline, it's not just about the armament of the B-17 Flying Fortress, whether it had a chin turret or not. It's also about different positions within the formation were particularly vulnerable to attack from the Luftwaffe.
Yeah, they would particularly want to pick off those towards the rear or low of the formation, or those right at the front of the formation, and obviously avoid those packed in the centre. But they would also do anything they could to break up those formations to make the attack easier, whether that was taking an aircraft out or using standoff weapons to fire rockets in, anything to break up that formation to make it easier to penetrate.
So when we're looking at the Bloody Hundredth, looking at whether it was particularly unlucky, there's a lot to think about, isn't there? There's a lot to consider. There's discipline, there's formation, there's the type of missions that you were going on, whether it was a deep mission into the heart of Germany without fighter escort cover, whether it was a milk run. It's very difficult to say whether the Bloody Hundredth was more or less lucky than other bomb groups, but one thing is for sure, they did suffer some horrendous losses in 1943.
Yeah, they did, and I think it's very difficult to say, were they the worst? It's very difficult to estimate that without looking at, a whole range of statistics. So there were bomber groups that flew for longer, there were bomber groups that flew fewer missions. So just looking at, say, absolute numbers of losses doesn't really tell you the story, and also you've got to look at the missions and where they were in those missions. In 43, the losses were high, but the losses did continue for the 100th right into 44, and some of the biggest, most significant losses are going to be occurred in 44 as well. Again, that will just reinforce the 100th, Bloody Hundredth legend. But it was a lot of luck involved in it. As I said, if you end up in those more vulnerable positions and are attacked. But one of the things you couldn't do, didn't matter how good you were as a pilot, you couldn't avoid the flak, and most of the casualties are going to actually be down to flak. And so, if you're attacking targets that are heavy in flak in nice clear days, then you're going to be much more vulnerable than otherwise. And so we were just an unlucky group.
I think that's true, because also the other thing is the nature of the target. Flying against a submarine pen on the French coast, it's not the same as flying deep into Germany to bomb Berlin. The concentration of flak around those targets, that's another variable. So, and then look at the draw where you are in the stack, low, medium, high, first wave or second wave, wherever you are, that's a massive factor. And then a lot of the raids go wrong because the fighter escort doesn't rendezvous with the bomber stream, because this is all done on bearings and times. So if your escort for the bits where they are, even later when the Mustang's going all the way, it still sometimes doesn't get to the right place at the right time. So you're an isolated bomb group. And the Luftwaffe fighter controllers are wise to this. In the early days, they know the limit of the American fighter range. And it's not until really you get fighters that can escort you all the way to the target and back where you've got a chance. But even then, it can only be in one place at a time. It can't be in two places at a time. And when you've got really long bomber streams, there's got to be a patch. There's got to be a hole where those fighters get in. And as Reggie just talked about, rocket firing, dropping mines, standoff weapons, all these different things are thrown at anything that can just make a wedge and create a gap where you can get in. And then you've got your more heavily armoured fighters with bigger, heavier weapons as well, all coming into. And the Luftwaffe, ironically, as the war progresses from 43 into 44, is actually getting stronger. So because of German fighter production, and the tactics are getting better as well. We talked about discipline, and there was no doubt that sometimes on the ground in those days there was a lack of military discipline that had to be established. A lot of what we call discipline in formation flying wasn't necessarily so much about discipline, but about experience. Because these young guys, they hadn't had much experience in flying B-17s. The number of hours they had, their experience of weather,
no experience of being attacked by German fighters. All the bombing practice is done in reasonably good conditions in America, and then they find themselves over here with the weather, the flak, and the fighters. So there's a lot to be said about their experience at that time and the training that they needed to actually fly these missions. I mean, they were here, so between June 43 and April 45, it's not a very long time operationally here, but the learning curve was really, really sharp after 43. Learning about, generally how to fly these aircraft, how to use the fighters. So first of all, you have no fighter cover, then you have fighter cover. But even then, it's how do you use that fighter cover? So at the start, the fighters would close escort the bombers. Later found out that wasn't a very good tactic because that allowed the German fighters to be drawn onto the formation. So they would then use the fighters to sweep ahead to clear the way. All of those things contributed to improving the statistics for the bomber groups. And also, by the time you get into 45, a lot of the really good German pilots have gone. They don't have, by 45, they are struggling to meet production. They are struggling to meet production of pilots. What's going up against the 8th, what's going up against the Mustangs is not as good as it was in 1943. So a lot of those things contribute to the general statistics improving. But even despite that, if you look at some of the missions of the 100th, I said they're still losing planes in quite large numbers right through towards the end, and that's because again, it's not just about fighters; it's also about flak and the density of those German defences around some of the targets that they're hitting.
What is well documented is the lack of discipline in the 100th before they get to UK. And they're flying on missions where people have supposedly going on rehearsal bombing missions with aircraft disappearing from the formation and going to visit their wives and things like that. And commanding officers replaced. And, these things do manifest themselves in how you perform in the air. I mean, I know that from my own personal military experience. If you don't get it right with the basics, it will happen, and those gaps will be exposed if people think they can just do what they like. But there is a really steep learning curve. And, if you look at the 100th did have a reputation, inverted commas, for colourful behaviour. But they soon learn that actually that's not the way ahead. And so much of it's down to the personality of the commanders at squadron and group level. But as Regis eloquently said, you can't measure that just in losses. It's where that formation is, where that group is, how it performs, what targets it goes against. So there is an element of luck, but there's also a huge element of training and focus and command. And you get this reputation of the Bloody Hundredth, and even every bomb group has the man who came to dinner as a legend. The guy who arrives the night before the mission, goes on the mission, gets shot down, and nobody knows who he is. So that's a real stark illustration of the attrition. To go and lose 10, 12 aircraft in a day, to then get up the next morning and say, we go again. And, it's almost unthinkable in this day and age, but these guys did it.
So, Mike, you say getting up, doing it again and again. There were, of course, people who didn't fly many missions simply because they were shot down, they were lost, they're missing in action. But one person who did do lots of missions with the Bloody Hundredth, Rosie Rosenthal, more than 50 missions. He did get up day after day and do it again and again. Let's go and find out a little bit more about Rosie Rosenthal now. You're listening to the Mighty Eights podcast, a podcast about the people, planes and the places of the United States 8th Army Air Force during World War II. We've come up the stairs now in the control tower to the main control room. Mike, we talk about the people, the planes and the places, but this part of the museum, this is very, very much about the people who flew the planes and the ground crew too. Yeah, it's a great spot, isn't it? I mean, you look around here, there's saxophones in cases, there's uniforms, silk wedding dresses. It really is spectacular. And of course, there's the Rosenthal cabinet, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But it's a conversion of what was the brain of the control tower, the control room itself. But it's been put to such good use, and it's part of the progress of the narrative timeline as you move through the Thorpe Abbotts Museum. And it's been very well done. So we come over to the Rosenthal cabinet, a floor-to-ceiling glass and wooden cabinet. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Rosie Rosenthal, an entire cabinet dedicated to him. A picture of Rosie's riveters, Rosie Rosenthal's crew at Thorpe Abbotts in 1943. His dress uniform there in the cabinet as well. His medals, an ammunition box belonging to one of his crew members, and even Rosie Rosenthal's wedding invitations. Ron Batley, you're a trustee of the museum here at Thorpe Abbotts, the 100th Bomb Group Memorial Museum. You actually met Rosie Rosenthal, a fascinating character. He didn't have to fly 52 missions, but he did, more than twice as many as he was required to do.
Well, he just felt that was the duty he wanted to do, and he was a lucky man to survive. 52 missions is a lot of times to fly into harm's way, isn't it?
And what kind of person was he?
Unassuming. His fellow airmen, they all looked up to Rosie. He was, in their minds, just a wonderful human being, I suppose.
He was a Brooklyn lawyer before he joined the 8th Air Force. After the war, he went to Germany. He was involved in the Nuremberg trials.
He was, yes. That is where he met his wife. And of course, we've got here at the museum wedding invitations. They were married in Germany just after World War II, while these trials, I believe, were going on.
That's a fantastic testimony from Ron, but to be Jewish, to join the 8th Air Force and to fly on combat missions is brave enough. To run the risk of being shot down, to then be shot down twice and to escape and get back is staggeringly brave, and I don't know that many people today would do that.
And then after the war, he resumed his lawyering and interviewed Hermann Göring, commander of the German Air Force and the second highest ranked Nazi during most of the war, as part of the Nuremberg trials.
What would it have been like to be in that room, to be Rosie Rosenthal, to be a Jew, to be a B-17 pilot, to be sat in a room with the second highest ranking Nazi who controlled the fighters that were actually trying to shoot you down for your 52 missions?
And he said later that seeing these strutting conquerors after they were sentenced, powerless, pathetic, and preparing for the hangman, was the closure I needed. Justice had overtaken evil. My war was over. So it was closure for him. He had gone through the war, 52 missions, as we said, shot down twice, evading capture, and then seeing justice served against the Nazis.
Yeah, after the Munster raid, where he's the pilot of the only aircraft that gets back, having lost all those other aircraft, he becomes quite a talisman for the 100th Bomb Group. And we talked about those horrific losses and that. He's there from that point forward, taking the bomb group forward, and remains an icon, a talisman, or whatever phrase you want to use for the group after the war.
So Rosie Rosenthal, a great survivor, not least, Ron, on the Munster mission of the 10th of October, when 13 planes went out on a mission and his was the only one to come back.
That mission especially, I think there were 15 aircraft left here originally, and 13 made the mission, and just one returned back here. You can imagine the feeling on base. They must have been devastated. Perhaps in this actual building, up there waiting for the mission to return, and just one came back. The effect that must have had, not just the senior officers here, but the ground crew, all the empty hard stands here. We know now, I think the final figure is 757 young men lost their lives flying combat missions from here, which is about average for a group flying this amount of missions, because there were several others who lost their lives, ground men for one reason or another.
And we're standing here in front of a picture of two pilots who were shot down within 2 days of each other, including one on the Munster mission when Rosie Rosenthal was the pilot of the only aircraft to make it back. Mike, the 100th Bomb Group was full of colourful characters, wasn't it?
It certainly was, and if you read all of the accounts that have been written, the Major John Egan, the CEO of the 418th, and Major Gale Bucky Cleven of the 350th, they loom large in those stories, and they are, you would say, colourful characters, but they're very much associated with the ill-disciplined days of the 100th when they're being punished in the air and things aren't as they should be on the ground, and they're very much on that big steep learning curve we've talked about. So when they get shot down, that has a huge impact on those that survive. But it really is a sea change in the way that the bomb group starts to behave and the culture around it. So Rosenthal is a different character altogether. And those that follow on, it sort of breaks the mould of the colourful, as we keep using that phrase, or the lively, formative months of the bomb group, of the 100th, and things change. But they're together. They are huge characters in the narrative of the 100th Bomb Group.
You're listening to the Mighty Eights podcast, the podcast about the people, planes and the places of the United States 8th Army Air Force during World War II. Mike, we've come into the main museum building here at Thorpe Abbotts. It's been a fantastic visit, hasn't it?
It really has, Johan, and it's quite a privilege to be allowed into these group museums in the closed season. And what it really does give you is an insight into the dedication of the volunteers, because the visitors in the summer season see it all polished up and ready and open, everything that's just as it should be, and the volunteers are scurrying around, showing them around, etc. But we don't see the cold January day like today, people painting things and moving things around. And every museum we've been to in the closed season has been the same. And it really does give you some insight into the real dedication and what it takes to be a volunteer at one of these bomb group museums.
A huge amount of dedication. We're joined by Simon Quilter. Simon, you deal with communications for the museum here at Thorpe Abbotts. With the release of the Masters of the Air miniseries, this could be a really big year for you.
Yeah, we expect it to be honest. All of the information that we've had through social media and the interest that we've had and other contacts do show that it's going to be a very busy summer for us, with potentially, we expect, up to twice as many visitors as we've had in previous years. Last summer we had around 3,000 visitors, and we're open on a Saturday, Sunday and a Wednesday. So there's a lot of people coming through the doors in that period, and this year will be even more than that.
And I guess the type of visitor that you're going to get is probably going to be a little bit different to the visitors that you've had up until now. The Masters of the Air is going to mean that the story of the 8th Air Force, of the 100th Bomb Group, of the Bloody Hundredth is going to reach far and wide.
Yes, absolutely. Last summer we had a visit from John Lucky Luckadoo, a 101-year-old veteran from the 100th Bomb Group who had served here 80 years ago. And we were privileged to have him here for a ceremony marking the Munster mission in October 1943. And we're privileged to get visits at the moment from a lot of veterans' families. But we get people from across Europe and across the States, to be honest, who are just interested. And the type of visitors that we'll get this year, no doubt, will be people who have seen the series, don't know an awful lot about the real 100th bomb group and the reality of it, and we'll be here to hopefully learn and take away the actual reality of what happened here 80 years ago.
And of course, Mike, the legacy of the 100th Bomb Group lives on today.
Yes, it does, with the 100th Refuelling Wing over at Mildenhall. Trace their lineage directly back to 100th Bomb Group. In fact, their air tanker refuelers fly with a square D on their tail fin, exactly the same as the B-17s did when they flew from here. So that's the 100th Bomb Group recognition symbol on their tails. And it's important when you're a unit today, whether you're the Grenadier Guards or you are the 100th Refuel Wing, to track your history back and have a foundation to build it on for your ethos and for your new recruits and your serving members to take pride in and refer to.
And Simon, there is that strong link between the Air Refuelling Wing, the 100th Air Refuelling Wing, and the museum itself. They're often involved with what you do, including coming here for things like patching ceremonies to commemorate that link and to remember the people who flew from here during World War II, those who returned, as well as those who paid the ultimate sacrifice.
Yeah, very much so. We have visits from Rob Paley, who's the 100th Air Refuelling Wing, 100th Bomb Group historian, part of the US Air Force at Mildenhall. He's over here regularly. In fact, he's doing some work for us at the moment. But the personnel come over, especially the new members of the Air Refuelling Wing. They come over here, and then they'll get a good tour around the museum.
And in your view, was the 100th Bomb Group, the Bloody Hundredth, were they unlucky?
I think they were certainly unlucky in the early part of the war with some of those missions. Regensburg, where they lost 7 aircraft in August 1943, and obviously we've discussed Bremen and Munster. But all of the other bomb groups that were associated with the US Army Air Force, they all had some terrible losses at different times. So overall, we probably weren't any worse than others if you look at the tally.
Mike, I guess there is no clear-cut answer then when it comes to whether the Bloody Hundredth was particularly unlucky or not.
No, probably not. We'll all have our own opinions, and the TV series will fuel the debate even further. But I think, as Simon's just said, that first 12 months was particularly bloody. So the name was justified, but the wheels down story, the strong characters, it all adds to the mix, doesn't it, and the debate, and it'll go on. But what is good is that the new renewed focus on the 100th in the next few months will attract more people to the history, to the subject, and hopefully they'll dig a bit deeper, and also they'll go to the other bomb group museums. It won't just be about the 100th. They'll get the wider story, and there'll be people who live in UK and people from much further afield and from the States. So all in all, it's going to be a good thing. It'll broaden everyone's horizons and bring more people to the subject, and be a fitting tribute to the men and some of the women who served in the 8th Air Force.
Simon Quilter, everybody at the 100th Bomb Group Memorial Museum, thank you very much for opening your doors to us during the closed season. Wish you all the best for 2024 and beyond. Mike, that's about it for this episode of the Mighty 8th podcast. We're going to be back next month. We're going to be looking at Big Week, a huge chapter for the Mighty 8th Air Force during World War II. That will be in February, but for now, from the Mighty 8th podcast, I'm Johan Tasker. Goodbye.
I'm Mike Peters. Goodbye.
Mom deserves the best, and there's no better place to shop for Mother's Day than Whole Foods Market. They're your destination for unbeatable savings, from premium gifts to show-stopping flowers and irresistible desserts. Start by saving 33% with Prime on all body care and candles. Then get a 15-stem bunch of tulips for just $9.99 each with Prime. Round out Mom's menu with festive rosé, irresistible berry chantilly cake, and more special treats. Come celebrate Mother's Day at Whole Foods Market.
1-800-Flowers.com is more than your birthday, anniversary, or just because gift-giving destination. We put our hearts into everything we do to help you celebrate all life's special occasions with friends and family. From our farmers and bakers, florists and makers, everything from 1-800-Flowers is made with love every step of the way, because we know that nothing is more important than delivering a smile. To learn more, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
The Claude 3 model family from Anthropic is your one-stop shop for enterprise AI. With models at every point on the price-performance curve, you no longer have to make trade-offs between intelligence, speed, and cost. Claude 3 Opus sets new industry benchmarks for intelligence. Sonnet strikes the perfect balance between skills and speed. And Haiku is the fastest and lowest cost model in the market, perfectly designed for high-volume, high-speed use cases. Join the thousands of enterprises who trust Anthropic to keep them at the frontier. Visit anthropic.com/Claude today.